for our final level. When you come to the end of your rail, there's a little trick we can use to start out for the levels on the next section. All we need to do is make a little groove where the rail is, grab our fingers around the end of it and pull it through onto our next level peg. Now there's two things we can do here. By using a float we can very carefully come in and pick that surplus sand up I mentioned, and then we need to fill in where the rail was. If we don't do that, we'll finish up with a fault line. So we just carefully remove that bit of sand down there and run in what we think we need. And then we can take a piece of wood very, very gently and just float it across our prepared surface, levelling off or removing any surplus. It's not firming, it's just levelling to the existing one. Now comes the exciting bit. We're almost ready to start laying, but there are a couple of golden rules. First of all, we've gone to all the trouble of preparing our screeded sand bed. We must keep off that. We only do as much as we need for the day, and we make sure we keep off while we're actually working around it. I say around it because we're starting in a corner here, and this is dictated by my plan. In an ideal world, I'd like to come off the highway, laying blocks towards the house. That way I can have the blocks stacked behind me. If you remember earlier, we tipped the sand onto the prepared area. So ideally off the highway. In this instance, we're going to start in this tiny corner here, and we're going to use a particular style of block called the Classico. Now we start with a single block. This would be the centre of our small circle. We've actually cut this one into quarters. Remember, we need a quarter circle here to start with. I'll show you how to cut safely, quickly and efficiently later on, but we've already cheated, cut that one, so we gently place him down like that. And then we need 2 of the small circle stones. Remember, if it was a complete circle, there'd be 8. And we start from one side and just place those flat, just onto the sand like that. And then the next one goes into there like that. Get those just in the right position, because if we start off here the right radius, when we come to change to the next type of block, it'll work a treat. And then we're going to start in with the large circle. We put 2 rows of these in. I'm just letting them slide down one another. That's important. We don't want to trap any sand, we don't want to put them in at an angle. Keeping my gloves out of the way so they don't make a mess. And then the second row, I'm actually going to start in at that side. That's because I'm going to put my cut block in later there. And slightly different angle, there's just a little bit of a gap on these at the base of them. I'll show you that in a second. Something like 6 or 7 mil on this particular row. Letting them drop down. So they're just putting at the top edge there, but we've got this gap at the bottom. So this is the second row of large circle blocks. And then there'll be a little cut this side. So it's 1 cut there, 1 cut there. Then I'm going to start on the next row, and I'm going to use 1 of the large circle, and then I'm swapping to a square-shaped block. See that? That goes in alternate. I'll just arrange them just right. Then the large circle again. Then the square. Just letting them drop down the face of one another as they go. Keeping the radius looking just right. That is so important, just to keep the flow of the blocks going in there. And then we shall cut 1 there. The next 2 rows are laid in this fashion. And a further 2 rows are laid using just the square stones. Now, to complete our Classico section, we're going to use a Classico in charcoal to put a row of what I call headers around here to differentiate between these stones and our next pattern of blocks. So all we do is, as we said earlier, drop them down, just butting up. Now, we want to work so we're always a couple of rows back from the edge of the last laid blocks. Otherwise we might cause them to dig into the sand, then we get false levels, we get sand trapped between, and the blocks wouldn't sit neatly. So I'm working just a couple of rows back. It's not uncomfortable. I'm just letting the blocks drop down to form that radius. We're now going to mark out our next area where we're going to lay the interset autumn mix of colours. Here we need to put our tape on the anchor point and scribe an arc to delineate the area. We're going to do this curved radius in a herringbone fashion. We need to mark it out so we can lay the blocks at right angles to the radius. Let me explain. We're going to mark out the radius with a curve in the sand, and when we've taken this all the way round, we then put a straight line across and measure the distance between the house wall and our retaining curb. We then halve this and take a line from the radius point by the gatepost, bringing it across the sand, stretching a line out. We're then going to mark a right angle out just off the edge of our Classico stones. As you can see, we're using a set square here. What I need to do now is adjust that line so I've got a line at right angles to that radius line. That is where I'm going to start laying from. So that's all set up. And one little good tip I could give you before we start laying, in this case the herringbone fashion, is to lay a row of what we call stretchers. That's just a row of blocks from one section to another, or around the edge of the curb like that. And this would mean that it saves little bits, in the case of meeting up with our Classico, little cuts that would be lost. Aesthetically it looks better. And talking of aesthetics, I've actually got 3 packs on the go, and I've cut the bands and I'm using them off the stacks vertically and mixing a few from each in each barrow load. That way I get a far better mix of colours. There's that row. Just take it in by eyesight as you actually go. Just slip that one under there, because it's quite important. I've measured out, hopefully, just the size of a block there. Now I can remove my set square and I can start and set my blocks in. Move these out of the way and show you, because this is quite important. This first block must go in absolutely at right angles and right under that line there. Then the next one goes, remember how they butt up face-wise, and down that line there. And then I can start and build off that. In fact, I'll put that one in from that side there. Now I can start the pattern going, and that's how, basically, we've restrained the edge, we've got a neat cutting area, and we can now start and lay, with quite some speed, a nice herringbone style pattern. As you can see, we've laid quite a lot of blocks. It's quite a fast job. There are 2 or 3 little tricks of the trade I can show you. First of all, there's a little trick called single-handed laying, where you simply place this row in, just as simply as that, remembering that they drop down the side of the preceding brick all the way like that. What you mustn't do, though, is get yourself into a little corner. Here's a little trick some people get wrong. They actually try and leave themselves a blind end like that and think they can drop a block in. And what very often happens, as we've got there, a little gap opens up and it pushes the line of the blocks out. We've kept our straight edge here to keep our line of blocks going. So don't ever do that. Take them out carefully. Remember, it's just long runs, butt them up and let them slide down. So that's single-handed laying. We go all the way along that open face in that direction and then come back using the block the other way to the end here, leaving the gap to cut to fit later on. On this side, if you want to be really ambitious, you can use what we call two-handed laying. And that's just a matter of dropping one block in one hand there, that goes down there, and another one goes in there. Step back, pick yourself a couple of blocks up, and one goes in there like that, let him slide down, and one goes in there like that. So if you want to move rapidly, you can do that way, but remember, that perhaps looks a more awkward pattern to work. For starters, try the single-handed laying, but don't work yourself into that little tiny corner, and you'll be amazed how many you can lay in just a few minutes. Having laid most of the area using the full blocks, we always finish up with small areas we've got to infill. There was our row that we put in here to differentiate and to give our strength when we cut in, we mentioned earlier. We've got this small gap. Now there are a couple of rules we must follow. We generally don't want a piece that hasn't got 3 manufactured sides. In other words, we could cut a piece like that or that angle or whatever. We shouldn't put little tiny bits in, just on 2 sides like that. If we're in a position where we've got a little tiny bit, it's better to take a further block out, cut it short and put a bigger piece in. So we don't want any little tiny bits infilling, that's quite important. But the secret is to measure each one to fit. And you carefully place it where the next block is required. And I'm using just a small piece of slate here, this works really well. And then squint down, square over the top of the block, make a little mark on that edge, look down this side, make a mark on that edge, just in the right position. You can see those 2 marks now. Then we can go to our block splitter, and this is the thing that we had to actually hire, and we know that that is the piece we're going to save. Now this is quite important. This must go in on this side. We lift the handle and place it so that the top blade marks on exactly the same line as our marks there. And we angle it down so it's resting on this sill. This sill, I'll show you why in a moment or so. Bring the handle down in just about the right position, if I get it just right. There we are. Bring the handle down, step back. Don't get to use the full length of the handle, there's no sense in pressing on there. Just a little bit of weight at this end, and it cuts as easy as that. Leave the handle down so you don't hurt yourself. And you'll see now that this is cut at a slight angle. So it will drop in at that angle, the sand will fill the gap, it just gives us that room to get it in. So we'll take that piece, and let's see if I've measured just about right. There we are, just a perfect fit, just tight, but it fits in square. Because the joints of Classico are larger than with conventional blocks, we need to fill them with Classico chip-ins before we do any compaction. We're using about 4 kilograms of chip-ins per square metre. We're going to brush them into the joints, and we must leave the surface swept clean before we carry out any compaction, otherwise it may cause scoring of the actual stones. Having compacted or vibrated them in one direction, we then top up the joints with some more chip-ins, again brushing them in, leaving the surface of the stones clean, before giving a second compaction, preferably in the opposite direction. We then seal these joints with an application of a very special Marley kiln-dried sand. I'll explain more about that in a moment or so, but let me move on to the interset blocks. First of all, we must sweep it off thoroughly, ensuring there's no stones, cut blocks or chips around, and ideally we should compact the area we've laid during the day, but no closer than 1 metre to any open or working edges. Then, providing the blocks are dry, we use the Marley kiln-dried sand, which is a very sharp, angular sand, which will lock into the joints, and we brush this in at somewhere in the region of 4.5 to 5 kilograms to the square metre. Now the first vibration we gave to the blocks caused vertical interlocking by driving the sand up into the joints. This kiln-dried sand is now going to be vibrated down to meet to cause a rotational interlocking, so the blocks are really locked together. We leave a little sand on the surface of the blocks to aid the passing of the compaction plate, vibrate in one direction, add a little sand if necessary, and then vibrate, ideally again, in the opposite direction. Here we're compacting a herringbone pattern, and this gives us an extra horizontal lock. It's a strong bond and recommended for where vehicles are likely to use the area. Well, here we are. Here's the completed drive. Isn't it magnificent? You know, there's something about the self-satisfaction of having done the job yourself. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's not taking that much hard work, just a little bit of common sense, a little bit of planning and thought. It's like a dream come true. The only thing I have to do over the next few weeks is watch the joints. You may find that the rains over a period of a few weeks will settle some of that kiln-dried sand. You may need just to keep a bag handy to top those joints up. Just brush a little sand in if you see what we call hungry joints. You know, looking at this, I've spent a fortnight doing it. I'm supposed to be a gardener, and there's nothing going to enhance this lovely drive any more than planting around it. I've started to prepare the borders, get the soil ready for planting. I think it's just the time to pop in these plants, some polyanthus and some roses.